They called it a coffin with windows, a death trap clinging to a frozen cliff, a place no sane person would spend a single night. But what one blacklisted engineer discovered, locked beneath its ice-sealed floors, would prove that sometimes the things the world calls worthless are hiding secrets worth $265 million. Before we explore this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind screamed down from the Bitterroot Range with the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it carved. Marcus Rivera stood in the parking lot of Miller's Hardware in Frost Ridge, Montana, staring at a piece of paper that might as well have been his death certificate. The foreclosure notice was printed on cheap white stock, but the words hit like steel: 30 days to vacate. Final notice. No exceptions. He was 38 years old, and everything he'd worked for had turned to ash in his hands. 3 years ago, he'd been a senior mining engineer at Cascade Minerals, pulling in 6 figures, respected, trusted. He'd had a house in Bozeman with a 2-car garage and a view of the mountains. He'd had colleagues who called him for advice, and a daughter who looked at him like he hung the moon. Then, he'd found the report. Deep in the files of the Greystone Mine expansion project, buried beneath layers of approvals and safety certifications, Marcus had discovered something that made his blood run cold. The support structures in the new shaft were substandard. The ore samples had been falsified. The whole operation was a disaster waiting to collapse, and when it did, it would bury 47 men alive. He'd done what he thought was right. He'd gone to his supervisor first, then to the safety board, then finally to the Federal Mine Safety Administration. He'd laid out the evidence with the precision of someone who'd spent 15 years reading geological surveys and load-bearing calculations. He'd shown them the math, the photographs, the doctored reports, and they'd destroyed him for it. Within 6 months, he was fired. Within a year, he was blacklisted. Every mining company in 3 states had his name on a list marked, "Do Not Hire." The whispers followed him everywhere. Troublemaker, paranoid, unstable. His wife left, taking their daughter Emma back to her parents in Oregon. His house went into foreclosure. His truck got repossessed. The mine never collapsed. Cascade Minerals hired a PR firm that painted Marcus as a disgruntled employee with a grudge. They produced their own engineers who testified that everything was safe, stable, up to code. The federal investigation quietly closed. No charges filed, no changes made. Marcus had been right about the danger, but being right didn't pay the rent. Now he stood in a dying mountain town with $317 in his checking account, a duffel bag of clothes in the back of a borrowed Honda, and nowhere left. Fall. The November sky pressed down like wet concrete, heavy with snow that hadn't started falling yet, but would, soon. Hard. He walked into Miller's Hardware because it was warm and he had nowhere else to go. The bell above the door chimed weakly. Inside, the store smelled like sawdust, motor oil, and decades of accumulated dust. An old man behind the counter looked up from a crossword puzzle, squinting through thick glasses. "Help you?" the man asked, voice rough as gravel. Marcus shook his head, shoving his hands deep into his jacket pockets. "Just warming up," the old man grunted and went back to his puzzle. Marcus wandered the aisles, pretending to browse sockets and drill bits he couldn't afford. That's when he saw the bulletin board near the back. A cork surface covered in faded notices, business cards, and handwritten ads. One yellowed index card caught his eye. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Mountain property for sale, $800, or best offer. Structure included. Serious inquiries only. Below that, a phone number and an address. 17 Switchback Road, $800. Marcus had 317, but the words, or best offer, hung there like a lifeline, thin and frayed, but still attached to something solid. He pulled out his phone, The screen cracked from when he dropped it 2 weeks ago and dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice tired and wary. "Yeah? I'm calling about the property on Switchback Road," Marcus said. "Is it still available?" There was a long pause. Then, "You're the first person to call in 2 years. You know what you're getting into. Tell me." "It's a shack," the woman said flatly. "Built in 1946 by my grandfather. Hasn't been lived in since 1998. It's falling apart. No heat, no power line to the road. Town says it's condemned, but they never bothered filing the paperwork. It's on 4 acres, mostly rock and ice. You'd have to be crazy or desperate to want it." Marcus looked down at the foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. "What if I'm both?" Another pause. Then something that might have been a laugh. "Then maybe you're perfect. When can you see it?" "Now," Marcus said. The woman's name was Helen Cortez, and she met him at the base of Switchback Road 90 minutes later. She was in her 70s, wrapped in a puffy coat that made her look like a small, irritated marshmallow. Her pickup truck was older than Marcus, but it ran, which was more than could be said for most things in Frost Ridge. "Follow me," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "And drive careful. The road's worse than it looks." She wasn't kidding. Switchback Road wasn't a road so much as a suggestion carved into the mountainside by someone who clearly hated both vehicles and human life. It climbed in brutal, narrow turns, the kind where you had to back up twice just to make the angle. On one side, sheer rock face. On the other, nothing but air, and a 300-foot drop to a boulder field below. Marcus's borrowed Honda groaned and slipped on loose gravel. His knuckles went white on the steering wheel. The higher they climbed, the colder it got. Snow appeared in patches, then sheets, then everywhere. At the 7th switchback, Helen's truck lurched to a stop. Marcus pulled up behind her and climbed out. The wind hit him like a fist, so cold it burned. Helen stood at the edge of the road, pointing up the slope. "There," she said. At first, Marcus didn't see it. The structure blended almost perfectly into the surrounding rock and snow. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out the shape. A small cabin, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, built directly into the cliff face. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows were dark and cracked. The whole thing leaned slightly to the left, as if it had given up trying to stand straight decades ago. "That's it?" Marcus asked. "That's it," Helen confirmed. "My grandfather built it after he came back from the war. Lived up here alone for 47 years. Never said why he picked this godforsaken spot. Never let anyone visit. When he died, the place just sat. My kids won't touch it. Town won't buy it. I'm too old to deal with it. So here we are." They hiked the last 100 yards up a trail that was more ice than dirt. Marcus's boots slipped twice. By the time they reached the structure, his lungs burned from the thin, frozen air. Up close, the shack looked even worse. The wooden siding had weathered to a uniform gray. Icicles hung from the eaves like teeth. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Helen produced a key, old and heavy, and worked it into the frozen lock. Something inside clicked, and the door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. The interior was dark and smelled like ice and abandonment. Helen pulled out a flashlight and swept the beam across the single room. Marcus saw a potbelly stove in the corner, a cot with a rotted mattress, a table and chair both covered in dust, thick as fur. The floor was rough-cut planks, warped and uneven. The ceiling showed daylight through gaps in the roofing. "Unlivable," Helen said flatly. "That's what the county inspector called it back in 2003. Structurally unsound. No utilities. No septic. You'd be better off pitching a tent." Marcus stepped inside, his boots echoing on the hollow floor. Despite everything, despite the cold and the decay and the sheer insanity of even considering this place, something stirred in his chest. Not hope, exactly. More like recognition. This shack was exactly what he deserved. Broken, forgotten, barely standing. But it was still standing. $300, Marcus said. That's all I have. Helen looked at him for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable in the weak light. Then she shrugged. Fine. I'll draw up the paperwork. You're buying it as is. No refunds, no complaints. And when you freeze to death up here, don't expect me to haul your corpse down the mountain. Deal, Marcus said. 3 days later, Marcus owned the shack. The paperwork was simple, processed through a title company in Missoula that seemed bemused by the whole transaction. Helen signed over the deed, took his $300 in cash, and drove away without looking back. Marcus stood alone on Switchback Road, watching her taillights disappear down the mountain. Then he turned and looked up at his new home. The town of Frost Ridge had opinions about Marcus Rivera's purchase, and none of them were kind. He learned this quickly when he stopped at the Antler Creek Diner for coffee and eggs the morning after taking possession. The diner was the kind of place where the vinyl booths had been patched with duct tape and the coffee tasted like it had been brewed during the Carter administration. A bell jangled when Marcus walked in. Conversation didn't exactly stop, but it definitely slowed. Heads turning to examine the stranger, Marcus took a seat at the counter. A waitress in her 50s approached, her name tag reading, Donna. She poured coffee without asking if he wanted any. "You're the guy who bought the Cortez place," she said. "Not a question. Word travels fast," Marcus replied. "Only thing that moves fast in Frost Ridge," Donna said. "That and gossip." She leaned against the counter, studying him with sharp eyes. "You know that shack killed 3 people, right?" Marcus's hand paused halfway to his coffee cup. "What?" "Well, not killed directly," Donna amended. "But Cortez's grandfather, he died up there. Heart attack, they said. But he'd been dead 2 weeks before anyone found him. Then, in 2001, a couple of hikers tried to shelter there during a storm. Hypothermia. And in 2006, some kid from Billings thought he'd squat there for the summer. They found him in October with half his body frozen solid. A man 2 stools down chuckled darkly. That place is cursed. Everyone knows it. Cortez was crazy, and whatever he was doing up there, it made the mountain angry. Mountains don't get angry, Marcus said quietly. They're just rock and ice. The man turned to face him. He was in his 60s, with a face like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too many winters. "You're new here, so I'll educate you. These mountains are older than your great-great-granddaddy's granddaddy. They got their own rules. And that shack? It's in a bad place. Wrong place. You'll see." Marcus didn't argue. He ate his eggs in silence, while the diner resumed its low hum of conversation. But now he felt eyes on him, measuring, judging, waiting for him to fail. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus learned that nearly everyone in Frost Ridge thought he was either suicidal or stupid. The hardware store owner refused to extend him credit. The propane company wouldn't deliver to Switchback Road. Even the postal service wouldn't guarantee mail delivery. "Too dangerous," the postmaster said with a shrug. "You want your mail, you come down and get it." Fine. Marcus didn't need their approval. He'd learned to live without approval 3 years ago, when the mining industry had blacklisted him. He hauled supplies up the mountain on foot, a sleeping bag rated to 20 below, tarps to patch the roof, a camp stove, canned food, water jugs. Each trip up Switchback Road left him gasping and exhausted. But he made the climb anyway, over and over, because where else was he going to go? At night, he lay in the sleeping bag on the rotted cot, listening to the wind scream around the shack's walls. The potbelly stove worked, barely, and he fed it scraps of wood he found scattered around the property. The smoke leaked through gaps in the chimney, making his eyes water, but it kept the worst of the cold at bay. During the day, he explored. The 4 acres were exactly as Helen had described, mostly rock, ice, and stunted pines that grew at impossible angles. But there was, something else, too. Something that nagged at Marcus's engineer brain. The shack itself was strange. Not just old and falling apart, but strange in its construction. The more Marcus examined it, the more questions emerged. Why build here, on this specific spot, when there were easier locations just 50 yards down the slope? Why anchor the structure so deeply into the rock face? The foundation went down at least 6 feet. He could tell from the exposed corner where erosion had eaten away the soil. That was excessive for a simple cabin. And the floor. Marcus spent an entire afternoon examining the floorboards. They were thick, rough-cut pine, but they weren't uniform. In the center of the room, the boards were newer, maybe 30 years old instead of 70. Someone had replaced them, and not carefully. The cuts were rough, the nails driven in at odd angles. He knelt on the floor, running his hands over the wood. When he pressed down on one particular board near the stove, it flexed, more than the others. He pressed harder. Something beneath it shifted with a sound like grinding stone. Marcus's heart rate picked up. He found a crowbar among his tools and carefully worked it under the flexible board. The wood groaned in protest, but finally came free. Beneath it was not dirt or insulation, but stone. Smooth, flat stone, clearly worked by human hands. He pried up 3 more boards, exposing a 2-foot square section of carved rock. In the center was a symbol, worn almost smooth by time, a circle intersected by 3 lines. Marcus sat back on his heels, mind racing. This wasn't original to the shack. This was older, much older. And someone, probably Helen's grandfather, had deliberately built over it, hiding it. Why? He spent the rest of the day clearing more floorboards. As the afternoon light faded, he'd exposed a 6-foot section of worked stone, all of it carved with the same precise, deliberate marks. It wasn't random. It was a pattern, a design. It was a seal. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his sleeping bag, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the wind. But his mind was elsewhere. He'd spent 15 years as a mining engineer. He knew rock, knew stone, knew what human hands could do with the right tools and enough time. The stone beneath the shack floor was basalt, dense and hard. The carvings were deep, at least an inch. Whoever had made them had spent months, maybe years, on the work. And they'd done it long before 1946, when the shack was built. Which meant Helen's grandfather hadn't created this. He'd found it. And then he'd spent 47 years living on top of it, alone, never letting anyone visit, never explaining why he'd chosen this particular spot on this particular mountain. Marcus climbed out of his sleeping bag and lit the camp stove. In its weak yellow light, he examined the exposed stone again. The circle and line symbol appeared 7 times in the section he'd uncovered. And at the far edge, barely visible, was the beginning of what looked like text. Not English, not any alphabet. Marcus recognized. He pulled out his phone and took photos, though the lighting was terrible. Then he sat at the rickety table and tried to sketch what he was seeing, his fingers clumsy with cold. A thought occurred to him, sharp and sudden. What if Helen's grandfather hadn't been crazy? What if he'd been guarding something? The wind chose that moment to hit the shack with particular violence. The whole structure groaned, and somewhere in the darkness, something creaked. Not wood, not wind, something deeper, something that came from below. Marcus froze, listening. The sound came again, a low resonance that he felt more than heard, like the mountain itself was breathing. He grabbed the flashlight and moved to the exposed stone. He pressed his ear against it, heart hammering. There it was, again, a sound like distant water, or wind through a vast space, or both. There was something beneath the shack, something hollow, something big. Marcus stood slowly, his mind churning through possibilities. He thought about the excessive foundation depth, the way the structure was anchored into the cliff, the replaced floorboards, the sealed stone. He thought about a man spending 47 years alone on a frozen mountain, never leaving, never explaining. He thought about why someone would do that, unless they were protecting something, or hiding from something, or both. The next morning, Marcus hiked down to Frost Ridge and used the library's internet. He searched for Switchback Road history. Nothing useful. He searched for Cortez family, Montana. A few genealogy entries. Nothing about the grandfather. He searched for archaeological sites. Bitterroot Range. Dozens of results, but nothing that matched what he'd found. Finally, on a hunch, he searched for World War II veterans. Montana unusual behavior. The results were mostly veteran support services and historical societies. But 3 pages in, he found something. A scanned newspaper article from the Billings Gazette, dated August 5, 1947. The headline read, "Local veteran purchases mountain property, plans extended solitude." The article was brief, just 3 paragraphs. It mentioned a decorated war veteran named August Cortez, who had purchased land in the Bitterroot Range and announced his intention to live a life of quiet contemplation, away from the noise of modern civilization. There was a photo. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. August Cortez was a tall man with dark hair and eyes that looked hollowed out, like he'd seen things that had carved away part of his soul. He wore a military uniform, but Marcus couldn't make out the rank or insignia in the grainy scan. The article's final line caught Marcus's attention. Mr. Cortez, who served with distinction in the European theater, declined to specify his reasons for seeking such extreme isolation. European theater, World War II, 1946, right after the war ended. A decorated veteran suddenly buying property in one of the most remote, inhospitable locations in Montana, and spending the rest of his life there alone. Marcus printed the article and walked back to the hardware store. The old man behind the counter, whose name turned out to be Dale, looked up from his crossword with obvious suspicion. "Need something?" Dale asked. "Information," Marcus said. He laid the article on the counter. "Did you know August Cortez?" Dale's expression closed off immediately. "Why?" "I bought his property. I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with." Dale stared at the article for a long moment. Then he sighed, setting down his pencil. "I knew August. Not well. Nobody did. He'd come down from the mountain maybe 3, 4 times a year. Always at night. Always alone. He'd buy supplies, minimal stuff, rice, salt, fuel. Never talked about himself. Never explained." "What did people think?" Marcus asked. Dale shrugged. "Most thought he was shell-shocked. You know, what they call PTSD now. War messed him up, and he couldn't handle being around people anymore. Some thought he was running from something, but nobody knew what. And a few." Dale paused, choosing his words carefully. "A few thought he was protecting something. Protecting what? Don't know. Just rumors. You hear stories about people who come back from wars carrying more than scars. Secrets. Things they can't talk about." August had that look, like he was carrying a weight that would crush a normal man. Marcus's pulse quickened. Did anyone ever ask him directly? One person did. Young reporter from Missoula, back in 73 or 74, hiked up to the shack, knocked on the door. August answered with a rifle, and told her if she ever came back, she wouldn't make it down the mountain. She believed him. Did she write the story anyway? Dale shook his head. Nothing to write. August never talked, never confirmed anything. He was just a crazy old man on a mountain. That's what everyone decided. Easier that way. Marcus carefully folded the article and pocketed it. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Dale called out, "Rivera." Marcus stopped. "Whatever you find up there," Dale said quietly, "be careful. August Cortez wasn't crazy. I'm old enough to recognize the difference. He knew exactly what he was doing. And if he spent 50 years guarding that place, There's a reason. What reason? Dale's eyes were serious. That's what you're going to find out. Question is whether you'll survive the answer. Marcus hiked back up Switchback Road as the afternoon light began to fail. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of snow. By the time he reached the shack, his face was numb and his fingers ached inside his gloves. He built a fire in the potbelly stove, boiled water for instant coffee, and sat at the table staring at the exposed stone floor. The carvings seemed to shimmer in the firelight, the symbols almost moving. He knew he should be careful. He knew he should probably contact someone, an archaeologist or a historian, someone who actually knew what they were doing. But Marcus also knew what would happen then. Officials would come. The property would be seized for research. He'd be evicted. Again. Left with nothing. Again. No. Whatever was beneath this shack, he'd found it. It was his. He moved to the exposed section of floor and began examining the stones more carefully. The pattern was complex, but it wasn't random. The symbols repeated in a sequence, and the carved lines connected them in specific ways. It reminded him of something, and after a moment, he realized what? A lock. Not a mechanical lock, but a puzzle lock. The kind where you had to understand the pattern to open it. Marcus pulled out his notebook and started mapping the symbols, numbering them, drawing lines to show connections. He worked by firelight, his coffee growing cold, his fingers cramping. Hours passed. The fire burned low. He fed it more wood and kept working. Sometime after midnight, he saw it. The pattern wasn't linear. It was spiral, starting from the outer edge and moving inward toward the center. And the sequence of symbols didn't just repeat. They progressed, each one building on the last, like a combination lock. He grabbed the crowbar and started prying up more floorboards, following the spiral. The wood came up easier now, like it wanted to be removed. Beneath, more carved stone, more symbols, the pattern growing clearer. By 3 in the morning, he'd exposed the entire floor. 20 feet by 30 feet of carved basalt, all of it marked with the intricate spiral pattern. And in the exact center of the room, where the spiral terminated, was something different. A circle carved, deeper than the others, about 2 feet in diameter. And in the center of that circle, a handprint, human-sized, carved into the stone with perfect detail, every line of the palm visible. Marcus stared at it, his exhausted mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just ancient stonework. This was a door, or a key, or both. The wind hit the shack again, and this time Marcus definitely heard it. That deep resonance from below, like the earth responding to the storm above, like something vast and old stirring in its sleep. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and placed it over the carved handprint. The stone was cold, colder than it should be, cold enough to burn. He pressed down. Nothing happened. Then, somewhere in the distance, deep below, something clicked. Stone, grinding against stone. Ancient mechanisms waking after decades of silence. The floor beneath Marcus's feet trembled, and from somewhere in the frozen darkness beneath the shack, he heard what sounded impossibly like a door unlocking. Marcus jerked his hand back from the carved stone, his heart slamming against his ribs. The trembling beneath his feet continued for 3 more seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The shack fell silent, except for the wind outside and the crackling of the dying fire in the potbelly stove. He stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did, but he knew what he'd felt. That wasn't an earthquake. That was something mechanical, something engineered, something that had been waiting beneath this mountain for longer than Marcus had been alive. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the table with his notebook, sketching diagrams and writing questions he had no way to answer. By the time weak gray light filtered through the cracked windows, he'd filled 12 pages with theories, calculations, and increasingly frantic notes. The floor, the carved basalt, the handprint, the click he'd heard from below. It all pointed to one impossible conclusion. There was a chamber beneath the shack, and Auguste Cortez had built his home directly over the entrance to protect it. But protect what? And from whom? Marcus spent the morning searching the shack inch by inch. He'd already examined the floor, but now he looked at everything else with fresh eyes. The walls were rough timber, but when he tapped them, some sections sounded hollow. The potbelly stove sat on a platform of stacked stones that seemed unnecessarily elaborate. Even the cot, with its rotted mattress, was positioned in a specific spot, not for comfort, but for purpose. In the far corner, behind where the cot had been, Marcus found something he'd missed before. A small wooden box, nailed to the wall, hidden behind a loose board. His fingers trembled as he pried it open. Inside was a journal. The leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. Marcus carried it to the table and opened it carefully. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, and the first entry was dated March 3rd, 1947. I have made my choice. There is no going back now. What I found in those mountains outside Munich will stay buried here, in these American mountains, where the wrong people cannot reach it. I will spend the rest of my life making sure of that. Marcus's hands shook as he turned the page. They told us we were liberating a research facility. Clean it out, they said. Document everything. But what we found wasn't research. It was plunder. Room after room of stolen treasures. Paintings, sculptures, gold, jewels, artifacts from a dozen countries. And in the deepest vault, sealed behind 3 feet of reinforced steel, something else. Something they'd been searching for since '39. Something that made the commanding officer turn white and order everyone out immediately. Marcus read faster, his breath coming in short gasps. We were told to forget what we saw, told it was classified above our clearance. But I'd already seen the inventory logs. I'd already read the Nazi research notes. I knew what they'd been looking for, and I knew why. 12 of us were assigned to transport it, all to a secure location. We drove for 3 days through the shattered remains of Germany, sleeping in shifts, never stopping except for fuel. And on the 3rd night, we were ambushed. The entry ended there. Marcus flipped to the next page. 7 dead, the rest of us scattered into the forest. I was wounded, bleeding, alone in the dark. And I had the most important cargo in my truck, the thing they wanted most. I couldn't let them have it. So I drove north, crossed into Switzerland, and made a choice that would define the rest of my life. I took it, all of it, everything that was in that sealed vault, and I disappeared. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. Auguste Cortez hadn't been a shell-shocked veteran hiding from civilization. He'd been a thief. Or a guardian, or both. He kept reading. The journal entries spanned years, tracking Auguste's journey from Europe to America, his careful planning, his acquisition of this remote property. And then, in an entry dated September 9th, 1947, the cave was perfect, deep, ancient, stable. The permafrost will preserve everything indefinitely. I've sealed the entrance with symbols I learned from a scholar in Zurich, a man who understood the old ways of hiding precious things. The lock will only open for someone who understands the pattern, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure no one gets the chance to try. Marcus flipped through more pages, scanning entries about Auguste's daily life, his routines, his paranoia. But near the end of the journal, dated December 19th, 1997, just months before Auguste's death, one final entry made Marcus's blood run cold. I am dying. I can feel it in my bones, and I've begun to wonder if I made the right choice. These treasures, they were stolen once. Then I stole them again. I told myself I was protecting them from the wrong hands, but maybe I was just another thief in a long line of thieves. I've arranged for the property to pass to my granddaughter Helen. She won't know what's beneath her feet. Maybe that's better. Maybe some secrets should stay buried. Or maybe someday, someone worthy will find it and do what I never could, return it to the world. The journal ended there. Marcus closed it carefully and stared at the carved stone floor. The handprint, the symbols, the spiral pattern. August had left instructions hidden in plain sight for someone clever enough to find them, someone like Marcus. He spent the next 3 days studying the floor pattern, cross-referencing it with the journal entries, trying to understand the mechanism August had described. The carved symbols weren't just decorative, they were a map, a sequence, a key. The spiral moved inward from the edges to the center, but it wasn't uniform. Some symbols were deeper than others. Some were connected by straight lines, others by curves. And the handprint in the center wasn't just a handprint. Around its edges were tiny marks, almost invisible unless you looked at exactly the right angle. Numbers, Roman numerals, worn almost smooth. Marcus spent an entire afternoon with a flashlight held at different angles, mapping every tiny mark he could find. There were 7 numerals total, arranged around the handprint like a clock face. IV, 7, twed, I, comma, VI. Not in order, a sequence, a code. He pulled out his notebook and started working through possibilities. If you followed the spiral pattern and stopped at each of those numerals in sequence, what would you spell out? What would you unlock? It took him 6 hours of trial and error, 6 hours of pressing different stones in different orders before he finally understood. The numerals weren't a sequence to follow. They were coordinates. If you traced lines between them, they formed a shape, a 7-pointed star. Marcus grabbed the crowbar and started examining the stones beneath each point of the star. The stone beneath the IV was slightly different from the others, fractionally raised. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He tried the 7. Still nothing. But when he pressed all 7 in sequence, starting with I and ending with 12, he heard it again. Click. This time, the sound was louder, closer, and it came from directly beneath the center of the floor. Marcus grabbed a pry bar and wedged it into the seam around the central circle, the one with the handprint. At first, nothing budged. Then, with a grinding sound like stone on stone, the circle shifted, rotated. A quarter turned to the left. Beneath it, darkness, and cold air rushing up, so cold it burned his lungs. He'd found the entrance. Marcus rigged a rope to one of the shack's support beams and lowered himself into the opening. His flashlight beam stabbed into absolute darkness, revealing rough stone walls and a shaft that dropped straight down at least 20 feet. His breath came out in white clouds that were instantly sucked away by the current of frigid air rising from below. Hand over hand, Marcus descended. His arms burned. His palms, even through gloves, ached from gripping the rope, but he kept going, driven by something beyond logic, beyond caution. His boots hit solid ground. He was standing in a tunnel, carved straight through the mountain's bedrock. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and they sloped downward at a gentle angle. The temperature here was easily 20 below zero. Ice crystals glittered on every surface. Marcus followed the tunnel. It went on for what felt like 100 yards, maybe more, descending steadily into the mountain's heart. His flashlight beam caught strange marks on the walls, not the spiral symbols from the floor above, but something else. Scratches, warnings, and in one place, painted in faded red, a single word in German, verboten, forbidden. The tunnel ended at a massive door, not wood, not modern steel. This was ancient iron, black with age, covered in frost, and set into the center was a circular lock mechanism, its surface carved with the same symbols Marcus had seen on the floor above. He stood before it, barely breathing, his mind spinning. This was it. This was what August had guarded for 50 years. Behind this door was whatever the Nazis had been searching for, whatever August had stolen and hidden in the Montana wilderness. Marcus reached out and touched the lock. The iron was so cold it felt hot. His fingers traced the symbols, following the pattern he'd memorized from the floor. The spiral, the sequence, the 7-pointed star. He began pressing the symbols in order, following the pattern exactly as August's journal had described. Each time he pressed one, he felt a mechanism shift deep within the door. Click, click, click. 7 times. 7 locks, disengaging, then silence. Marcus gripped the door's handle, a massive iron ring that took both hands to hold. He pulled. Nothing moved. He pulled harder, putting his weight into it, his boots slipping on the ice-covered stone. The door groaned, shifted, began to swing inward with the sound of centuries-old hinges protesting their use. Cold air blasted out, so intense it drove Marcus back 3 steps. His flashlight beam penetrated the darkness beyond the door, and what it revealed made him forget the cold, forget the danger, forget everything except what lay before him. A cavern, natural, carved by ancient water flow, expanded over millennia into a cathedral of stone and ice. The walls soared 50 feet overhead, meeting in a vaulted ceiling encrusted with icicles the size of telephone poles. And on the floor of this frozen cathedral, arranged in precise rows like soldiers at attention, were boxes, crates, containers, hundreds of them. Marcus stepped through the door, his flashlight beam sweeping across the impossible sight. Wooden crates stamped with German military markings, metal strongboxes with elaborate locks, leather trunks sealed with wax and string, and in the center of it all, standing alone like an altar, a single massive container made of reinforced steel, 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. Its surface covered in warning symbols Marcus didn't need to read to understand. What happens next will shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about history, greed, and the true price of keeping secrets. The ice-locked vault holds more than treasure. It holds a legacy that powerful people died protecting, and that one desperate man is about to unleash on an unsuspecting world. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus approached the nearest wooden crate, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the crowbar. The wood was old, but preserved perfectly by the constant freezing temperature. He wedged the bar under the lid and pried. The nails shrieked in protest, then gave way. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were paintings. Real paintings, museum quality. Their colors still vibrant after 80 years in this frozen tomb. Marcus carefully lifted the first one, unwrapping it with trembling fingers. Even with his limited art knowledge, he recognized it immediately. The style, the brushwork, the signature in the corner. This was a Rembrandt, an actual Rembrandt worth millions, sitting in a crate in a cave beneath a Montana mountain. He lowered it carefully and reached for the next. This one was smaller, more modern. The bold colors and fractured perspective were unmistakable. Picasso. And beneath that, wrapped in silk that had somehow survived intact, was something that made Marcus's knees weak. A medieval manuscript, illuminated pages glowing with gold leaf and precious pigments. The text in Latin he couldn't read, but recognized as ancient. He moved to the next crate. Gold bars, stacked like bricks, each one stamped with Nazi eagles. The crate after that held jewelry, necklaces dripping with diamonds, ruby-encrusted crowns, emerald brooches the size of his fist. In the third crate, he found ancient coins, Roman and Greek, thousands of them, their faces worn smooth by centuries of handling. Marcus stood in the center of the cavern, turning slowly, his flashlight illuminating crate after crate after crate. Each one held treasures stolen from across Europe during the war. The Nazis had plundered entire nations, and somehow August had stolen a piece of that plunder and hidden it here. But why? Why not return it? Why not alert authorities? August had been a decorated veteran, a hero. He could have been famous, celebrated, rewarded. Instead, he'd chosen exile and silence. Marcus pulled out August's journal and read the entries again, searching for answers. And there, in a passage he'd skimmed past before, he found it. They tried to kill us for it. Not the Germans. Our own people. On that third night, when we were ambushed, I saw the shooters. They wore Allied uniforms, but they weren't rescuing us. They were executing us. Someone on our side wanted this hall to disappear, wanted us to disappear. I realized then that this treasure was too valuable, too tempting. It would corrupt anyone who touched it. So, I took it, all of it, and I buried it where greed couldn't reach. Marcus closed the journal, his mind reeling. August hadn't been hiding the treasure from Nazis or criminals. He'd been hiding it from his own government, from people who would have killed him for it. And now Marcus had found it, which meant he faced the same choice August had faced 70 years ago. He spent the next hour exploring the cavern, cataloging what he could see. Every crate he opened revealed new wonders: ancient Greek statuary, Egyptian artifacts, medieval weapons encrusted with gems, books, and manuscripts from a dozen cultures. The scope of it was overwhelming. This wasn't just a treasure. This was humanity's stolen heritage, locked away in ice. At the back of the cavern, Marcus found what August had called the most important cargo. The reinforced steel container stood alone, separated from everything else. Its surface, etched with warnings in multiple languages. Marcus recognized German, French, Italian, and what might have been Hebrew. The lock on this container was different from the others, more complex, more serious. This wasn't designed to keep out thieves. This was designed to keep something in, or to make absolutely certain that only someone truly determined could open it. Marcus studied the lock mechanism. It required 3 keys, used simultaneously, but there were no keys anywhere in the cavern. He searched for an hour, checking every crate, every corner, every surface. Nothing. He was about to give up when something in August's journal caught his eye. A passage dated July 4th, 1963. Today I melted down the 3 keys. Better that no one ever opens that final container. Better that it stays sealed forever. What the Nazis wanted most. What they would have used to justify everything. What they searched the world to find. Let it sleep. Let it be forgotten. Some knowledge is too dangerous to exist. Marcus stared at the words. August had destroyed the keys. Whatever was in that steel container would stay sealed forever. A part of Marcus felt relief. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years being punished for telling the truth, that had lost everything for doing what was right, felt frustrated. What was in there? What was so dangerous that August had locked it away for eternity? He approached the container again, running his hands over its cold surface. The warnings were explicit. Do not open. Death awaits. Let the dead remain dead. Different languages, same message. Marcus pressed his ear against the steel. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Whatever was inside had been still for 80 years. He stood there for a long time, torn between curiosity and caution. Finally, he forced himself to step away. August had made his choice. Marcus would respect it. For now, he returned to the main cavern and started photographing everything. His phone battery was at 18%, but he managed to capture dozens of images. The crates, the artwork, the gold, the ancient artifacts. Evidence, proof, that this was real. As he worked, a thought kept nagging at him. What was he going to do with this? He couldn't just haul it all up to the surface and call the police. August had hidden this for a reason. Someone had tried to kill him for it. The same thing could happen to Marcus. But he also couldn't just leave it here. This treasure belonged to the world. These artworks had been stolen from museums, from families, from entire cultures. They deserved to be returned. The problem was trust. Who could he tell? Who could he trust not to either steal it or kill him for it? Marcus climbed back up the rope, his arms screaming in protest. By the time he reached the shack, his phone battery was at 4%. He plugged it into his portable charger and collapsed onto the cot, exhausted. He must have fallen asleep, because when he opened his eyes, it was dark outside. The fire had died, the shack was freezing, and someone was knocking on the door. Marcus sat up, instantly alert. No one came up Switchback Road at night. No one came up here at all except him. The knock came again, patient, persistent. Marcus Rivera? A woman's voice, muffled by the door. My name is Sarah. I'm Helen Cortez's daughter. We need to talk. It's about what you found. Marcus's blood turned to ice. How did she know? He hadn't told anyone. He'd barely been down in the cavern for 6 hours, unless someone had been watching. He moved to the door but didn't open it. How do you know what I found? A pause. Then, because my grandfather left me a letter, to be opened only if someone bought this property and stayed longer than a month. You're the first person who has. The letter explains everything, and it warns me that you're in danger. From who? From the same people who tried to kill him 70 years ago. The ones who never stopped looking. The ones who know, somehow, that you've opened the vault. Please, let me in. We don't have much time. Marcus stood frozen, his hand on the door handle. Every instinct screamed not to trust her. But another part of him, the part that had been alone on this mountain for weeks, desperately wanted to believe someone could help. He opened the door. The woman standing outside was in her 40s, bundled in a heavy coat, her face red from cold. She looked nothing like Helen, but her eyes had the same sharp intelligence. In her gloved hands, she held a flashlight and a sealed envelope. "Thank you," she said, stepping inside. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but you need to read this." She handed him the envelope. It was addressed in shaky handwriting, "To whoever finds the truth." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, dated December 20th, 1997, the day after August's final journal entry. "If you're reading this, then you've found my secret. And you're wondering what to do with it. I can't tell you that. I can only tell you what I learned. Treasures, this valuable, destroy everyone who touches them. The Nazis stole them. I stole them from the Nazis, and people on both sides killed for them. If you try to return them through official channels, you'll disappear. The same people who tried to stop me are still out there, still watching, still waiting. But if you do nothing, if you let them stay buried, then all those stolen histories stay lost forever. It's an impossible choice. I'm sorry I've left it to you. I tried to carry this burden alone. Maybe you'll be stronger than I was. Maybe you'll find a way I couldn't see." Inside the large steel container is something the Nazis considered their greatest prize. They searched the world for it. They killed thousands to possess it. I've kept it sealed because I believe some powers are too dangerous to exist. But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps keeping it hidden is just another form of theft. The choice is yours now. Choose wisely, choose bravely, and know that whatever you decide, someone will hunt you for it. Signed, August Cortez. Marcus looked up at Sarah, his hands trembling. What does he mean? What's in the container? Sarah's expression was grave. I don't know. My grandfather never told anyone. But according to his letter to my mother, it's the reason the Nazis were willing to lose the war. It's the reason they kept searching even as Berlin fell. Whatever it is, people have died for it. And now, they know you found it. How could they possibly know? Sarah pointed at the exposed floor, at the opened entrance to the cavern below. This mountain has been monitored for 70 years. Seismic sensors, probably. Maybe even cameras. The moment you opened that door, you triggered alarms somewhere. And now, they're coming. As if on cue, Marcus heard it. Faint, but growing louder. The sound of engines. Multiple vehicles. climbing Switchback Road in the darkness. Coming for him. Coming for the treasure. Coming for whatever secrets lay in that sealed steel container. And Marcus Rivera, who had already lost everything once, suddenly realized he was about to lose a lot more than treasure. He was about to lose his life. Marcus's mind raced as the sound of engines grew louder, echoing off the mountain walls. Sarah moved to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. 3 vehicles, maybe 4. They're about 2 switchbacks down. How much time do we have? Marcus asked, already moving toward the rope that led down to the cavern. 5 minutes, maybe less. Sarah turned from the window, her face pale. My grandfather's letter said, if this happened, there's only one choice. Seal it back up. Make it look like you never found anything. Marcus stared at the open entrance in the floor, at the darkness below that held 80 years of secrets and $265 million in stolen history. Every fiber of his being screamed to protect it, to document it, to find a way to return it to the world. But Sarah was right. If these people were willing to kill August, they'd have no problem killing Marcus. Help me, he said, grabbing the nearest floorboards. Together, they worked frantically, replacing the boards over the entrance, covering the carved stone. Marcus's hands shook so badly, he dropped the hammer twice. Sarah worked with practiced efficiency, as if she'd prepared for this moment her entire life. The engines were closer now, maybe 2 minutes away. They finished covering the floor just as headlights swept across the shack's walls. Marcus grabbed August's journal and shoved it into his jacket. Sarah was already at the door. Follow my lead, she whispered. And whatever happens, act confused. You're just a desperate man who bought a cheap property. Nothing more. The vehicle stopped outside. Doors slammed. Footsteps crunched on frozen ground. Then the door burst open without warning, kicked in by a man in tactical gear who swept the room with a rifle-mounted flashlight. Hands up! Now! Marcus raised his hands, his heart hammering. Sarah did the same, her face arranged in an expression of shocked innocence. 3 more men entered, all armed, all wearing black tactical gear, with no identifying marks. The last man through the door was different. Older, maybe 60, wearing an expensive coat over a suit. His gray hair was perfectly styled despite the mountain wind, and his eyes were the coldest thing Marcus had ever seen. Search it, the man said quietly. The tactical team spread out, moving through the tiny shack with practiced efficiency. They checked the walls, the ceiling, the potbelly stove. One of them stomped on the floorboards, listening for hollow sounds. Marcus held his breath as the man's boot came down directly over the sealed entrance. The board held. The man moved on. After 5 minutes of searching, the team leader shook his head. Nothing, sir. Just what you see. No excavation. No disturbance. The older man's eyes narrowed. He looked directly at Marcus. Who are you? Marcus Rivera. I bought this property 3 weeks ago. Who the hell are you? And why are you breaking into my home? The man ignored the question. Why did you buy this particular property? Because it was cheap, and I'm broke. Is that a crime? What do you know about August Cortez? Marcus forced himself to shrug. That he was the previous owner. That he died here. That's it. Now seriously, who are you people? The man studied Marcus for a long moment. Then he turned to Sarah. And you? Sarah Cortez. August's granddaughter. I came to check on Mr. Rivera since he's living on family property. Is there a problem? The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or suspicion that hadn't quite solidified into certainty. He pulled out his phone, checked something on the screen, then looked around the shack one more time. Our instruments detected seismic activity originating from this location, he said finally. Significant activity. The kind that would indicate excavation or tunneling. Marcus's mind raced. This whole mountain is unstable. There are rock slides every other week. Maybe your instruments picked up one of those. Maybe. The man didn't sound convinced. He gestured to his team. Let's go. But we'll be monitoring this location very closely. He paused at the door, looking back at Marcus. Mr. Rivera, if you find anything unusual on this property, I strongly suggest you contact authorities immediately, for your own safety. Then, they were gone, boots tramping back to their vehicles, engine starting, lights receding down the mountain. Marcus and Sarah stood frozen until the sound faded completely. Then Marcus's knees buckled, and he sat down hard on the floor. What the hell was that? He gasped. Sarah moved to the window, watching to make sure they were truly gone. That was exactly what my grandfather warned about. Private security, probably working for a consortium of collectors who've been searching for this hall since 1945. They must have sensors planted all over this mountain. They'll be back. Yes. But now they're not sure. You confused them. They expected to find excavation, and instead they found two people in a falling-apart shack. Sarah turned to him. But Marcus, you can't open that vault again. Not for a long time. Maybe not ever. They're watching. Marcus pulled August's journal from his jacket, holding it like a lifeline. Your grandfather spent 50 years guarding this. He died alone on this mountain, protecting it. And for what? So it could stay buried forever? Better buried than in the hands of people who'll kill for it. But it doesn't belong to them, or to me. Those paintings, those artifacts, they were stolen from families, museums, entire countries. They deserve to be returned. Sarah's expression softened. I know, but how? The moment you report this to anyone official, you'll either disappear or it'll get seized by governments who'll fight over it for decades. My grandfather chose the only option he could see. Hide it until someone braver or smarter could figure out what to do. Marcus looked down at the journal in his hands. He thought I might be that person. Are you? He didn't have an answer. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus lived in a state of constant paranoia. He saw surveillance in every shadow, heard threats in every sound. The tactical team didn't return, but he knew they were watching, waiting. One wrong move, and they'd be back. He needed help. Real help. But who could he trust? The answer arrived on a gray morning in late November, when a battered Honda Civic struggled up Switchback Road and parked outside the shack. Marcus watched through the window as a teenage girl climbed out, pulling a backpack from the trunk. His heart stopped. Emma. His daughter was 16 now, taller than he remembered. Her dark hair cut short, her face showing the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from her mother. She saw him at the window and waved, uncertain. Marcus opened the door, emotions warring in his chest. Emma, what are you doing here? Mom said you were living on a mountain like some kind of hermit. Emma climbed the icy path carefully. I wanted to see if you were okay. Does your mother know you're here? She thinks I'm at a friend's house for Thanksgiving break. Emma reached the door, looking up at him with eyes that held more hurt than anger. Are you going to invite me in, or do I have to freeze out here? Marcus stepped aside, and his daughter entered the shack. She looked around at the rough walls, the potbelly stove, the makeshift repairs, and something in her expression cracked. Dad, what happened to you? Marcus closed the door, against the wind. Long story. I've got time. Emma dropped her backpack and sat at the rickety table. Mom said you lost your job, said you went crazy, made accusations. That ruined your career. But that didn't sound like you. So, I want to hear your version. Marcus sat across from her, studying his daughter's face. She'd grown up so much in 3 years. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been 13. Still young enough to believe her father could fix anything. Now she was nearly an adult, and the weight of the world had touched her too. He told her everything. The mining report, the falsified data, the whistleblowing, the blacklisting. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to make himself the hero. He just told her the truth. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You did the right thing." "Did I?" I lost everything. Lost you. You didn't lose me. I just didn't know how to reach you. Emma leaned forward. Mom painted you as the bad guy, but I never believed it. I know you. You wouldn't make something up. So, if you said those mines were dangerous, they were. Marcus felt something in his chest loosen. A knot he'd been carrying for 3 years. Thank you. They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the wind outside, and the crackling fire. Then Emma looked around the shack again, her engineer's eye inherited from him, assessing the structure. This place is actually pretty solid, she said. Terrible insulation, and the roof's a disaster, but the bones are good. The foundation, especially. It's like whoever built it was planning for it to last centuries. Marcus smiled faintly. There's a reason for that. What reason? He looked at his daughter, this brave, brilliant girl who'd driven 6 hours through mountain roads to check on her disgraced father, and made a choice. If he couldn't trust Emma, he couldn't trust anyone. Can you keep a secret? He asked. A really big secret? Emma's eyes narrowed. How big? $265 million big. He told her everything. About August Cortez. About the journal. About the cavern beneath the floor, and what it contained. He showed her the photographs on his phone. He explained about the tactical team and the consortium and the impossible choice he faced. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression moving from disbelief to shock to something like awe. When Marcus finished, she stood up and walked to the covered floor. Show me, she said. Emma, it's dangerous. If they're watching, then we'll be careful. But Dad, if what you're saying is true, this is the find of the century, and you can't handle it alone. She was right. Marcus knew she was right. He'd been paralyzed by fear and indecision for 2 weeks. Maybe what he needed was someone to share the burden. Someone he trusted absolutely. Together, they waited until nightfall. Marcus covered the windows with blankets and lit the shack only with a single candle. Then they carefully removed the floorboards, revealing the carved stone beneath. Emma knelt beside the symbols, running her fingers over the spiral pattern. This is incredible. Dad, this isn't Nazi work. This is older. Much older. Look at the weathering patterns on the cuts. This stone was carved centuries ago. Maybe longer. Marcus blinked. What? August didn't create this entrance. He found it. This was here long before him. Emma pulled out her phone and started taking detailed photographs of the symbols. These markings, they're not German or any modern language. They look almost runic, but the style is wrong. This is something else. Marcus stared at the pattern he'd studied for weeks, seeing it with fresh eyes. Emma was right. The symbols predated the World War II era by centuries, possibly millennia. Which meant August hadn't just hidden Nazi treasure in a convenient cave. He'd found something ancient and used it for his own purposes. The question was, what else was down there? What had the cave been used for before August claimed it? I need to see the cavern, Emma said, already tying a rope around her waist. They descended together, Marcus first, then Emma. When her feet touched the cavern floor, and she saw the scope of what lay before them, she gasped. Oh my God. They spent 3 hours exploring by flashlight, Emma documenting everything with meticulous precision. She photographed the crates, sketched the cavern's dimensions, and examined the geological formations with the eye of someone who actually understood what she was seeing. This cave system is massive, she said, pointing her light at the far wall, where several dark openings suggested deeper passages. What you found is just the entrance chamber. There's more, potentially much more. Marcus followed her light. He'd been so focused on August's treasure, he hadn't considered that the cave might extend deeper into the mountain. Should we explore? Not without proper equipment. But Dad, we need to think about this scientifically. If we want to document and eventually return these artifacts, we need a plan. A real plan. Not just you alone in a shack, hoping for the best. Emma moved to the center of the cavern, turning slowly, her analytical mind clearly working through problems. First, we need to properly catalog everything. Second, we need to establish provenance for each piece, prove where it came from, so it can be returned to the right owners. Third, we need to figure out how to move all this without destroying it or attracting attention. And fourth, she paused, her light settling on the massive steel container at the back of the cavern. We need to figure out what's in there. Marcus told her about August's warning, about the melted keys, about the Nazi obsession with whatever was inside. Emma approached the container slowly, examining the lock mechanism. 3 simultaneous keys, but the locks themselves are mechanical, not magical, which means they can be opened. She looked back at Marcus. If we had the right tools. August didn't want it opened. August was scared. But Dad, you're an engineer. I'm studying to be one. Between us, we can figure this out. The question is, do we want to? Marcus thought about the journal, about August's warning that some knowledge was too dangerous to exist. But he also thought about everything that had been stolen from the world, hidden away, kept from the people it belonged to. Yes, he said finally, I want to know. The world deserves to know. Emma smiled, and in that moment, she looked exactly like she had at 13, eyes bright with curiosity and determination. Then let's figure it out. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus and Emma developed a system. During the day, they worked on improving the shack, making it look like a legitimate restoration project. Emma was brilliant at creating the appearance of normal activity. She hauled up supplies, fixed the roof properly, installed a wood stove that actually worked. To any observer, they were just a father and daughter bonding over a construction project. But at night, they descended into the cavern and worked by battery-powered lights, carefully cataloging August's treasure. Emma created a detailed database on an encrypted laptop, recording every item, photographing it from multiple angles, researching its history. The scope of what August had saved was staggering. There were paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Klimt, and dozens of other masters. There were sculptures from ancient Greece and Rome. There were medieval manuscripts, Renaissance jewelry, and artifacts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. Each piece told a story of theft, of families torn apart, of culture ransacked. And Emma documented it all with meticulous care. Marcus's role was different. Using his mining engineering knowledge, he began studying the cavern itself, mapping its structure, identifying weak points, and figuring out how to safely excavate and preserve what they found. The cave was remarkably stable, the permafrost acting as a natural preservative, but moving hundreds of crates through the narrow entrance shaft would be nearly impossible without modern equipment, unless they found another way. Marcus spent days exploring the deeper passages Emma had noticed. Most led nowhere, dead ends carved by ancient water. But one tunnel, partially collapsed and hidden behind a fallen section of ice, showed promise. Marcus carefully cleared the entrance and crawled through. On the other side, he found something impossible. A second chamber, smaller than the first, but this one clearly worked by human hands. The walls were smooth, carved with the same ancient symbols from the entrance, and in the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, empty now, but clearly designed to hold something important. Marcus's flashlight beam caught markings on the pedestal's base. He brushed away centuries of dust and ice, revealing carved text. Not German, not English, something older. He took photographs and brought them back to Emma, who immediately started researching. 3 days later she had an answer. It's Proto-Germanic, she said, looking up from her laptop with wide eyes. Dad, this chamber predates Rome. Whoever carved this was here over 2,000 years ago. What does it say? Emma read carefully from her translation notes. Here lies the treasure of the mountain, guarded by stone and ice. Only the worthy may claim it, and those who take without understanding will bring ruin. Marcus sat down slowly. The Nazis. They were looking for this place. Not just for the stolen art, but for whatever was supposed to be on that pedestal. And August found it first. Emma finished. Whatever the Nazis wanted, whatever they killed for, August took it and sealed it in that steel container. They looked at each other, the implications settling over them like snow. This wasn't just about returning stolen art. This was about preventing something dangerous from falling into the wrong hands. Something the Nazis had considered important enough to search for until the very end of the war. "We have to open it," Marcus said. "We have to know what we're protecting." Emma nodded slowly. "I've been studying the lock mechanism. It's complex, but it's still mechanical. 3 key holes, but they're not independent. They're linked through internal gears. If we can access the mechanism from the back." She pulled out her sketches, showing Marcus her plan. It was brilliant and terrifying. They'd have to cut through the steel container's rear panel, access the lock mechanism from behind, and manually disengage the tumblers. It would take weeks of careful work. One mistake could destroy whatever was inside. But they had time. The tactical team hadn't returned. The sensors, if they were still active, had detected nothing alarming. And Marcus had Emma, brilliant, determined Emma, who'd inherited not just his engineering mind, but his stubborn refusal to leave a problem unsolved. They started work the next day. Emma had brought tools from her mother's garage, quality equipment Marcus hadn't seen since his mining days. They set up a workspace in the ancient chamber, using battery-powered lights and working in shifts to avoid exhaustion. The steel was thick, hardened, designed to resist cutting, but Marcus knew metals, understood their properties. He used a plasma cutter on its lowest setting, making tiny, precise cuts over the course of days. Emma worked beside him, measuring, calculating, ensuring each cut followed the exact pattern she'd designed. The community of Frost Ridge began to notice changes. Emma made regular trips down the mountain for supplies, and unlike Marcus, she was friendly, talkative, normal. She bought groceries at the local market, ate at the Antler Creek Diner, and answered questions about what they were doing with cheerful vagueness. "Just fixing up my dad's place," she'd say. "Bonding project, you know?" Slowly, the town's perception shifted. They'd seen Marcus as crazy, dangerous, doomed. But Emma was clearly sane, clearly competent. And if she believed in her father, maybe they'd judged him too harshly. Dale, from the hardware store, started offering advice on weatherproofing. Donna, from the diner, sent up care packages of food. Even the postmaster began holding Marcus's mail without complaint. They weren't friendly exactly, but the hostility had eased. Marcus wasn't a pariah anymore. He was just the strange guy on the mountain with the good daughter. 6 weeks into the project, they made the breakthrough. Marcus's final cut through the steel panel completed the access point. Emma carefully removed the section, revealing the lock mechanism inside. It was beautiful, in its way. 3 separate tumbler assemblies, each connected to the others through a series of brass gears worn smooth by time. Emma studied it for an hour, tracing the mechanical logic, understanding how August had designed it to be unopenable without the correct keys. "I can do it," she said finally. "But it'll take time. Maybe another week." "Do it," Marcus said. That week was the longest of Marcus's life. Every night, they descended into the cold darkness and worked by flashlight, while Emma carefully manipulated the tumblers, testing each movement, making microscopic adjustments. Marcus watched, unable to help, holding tools when needed, but mostly just being there, bearing witness. On the 7th night, Emma made the final adjustment. She looked at Marcus, her face pale in the flashlight's glow. "This is it. When I release this last tumbler, all 3 locks will disengage simultaneously." Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Emma took a breath. made one final delicate movement with her tools, and somewhere deep in the mechanism, something clicked, then clicked again, then a third time. The locks disengaged with a sound like thunder in the frozen chamber. Emma stepped back, and together they moved to the front of the container. The massive door, sealed for 80 years, now hung loose on its hinges. Marcus gripped the handle with both hands and pulled. The door swung open, and cold air rushed out, colder than the cavern, colder than the mountain, cold like the breath of centuries. Marcus's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness inside, and what it revealed made him forget how to breathe. The container was lined with lead, thick panels designed to protect its contents from the outside world. And mounted on a steel frame, in the exact center, was a case made of crystal, perfectly clear, perfectly preserved. Inside the crystal case lay a book, not a modern book, not even a medieval manuscript. This was ancient beyond measure, its pages made of something that looked like thin sheets of hammered gold, covered in script that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light. The binding was a material Marcus couldn't identify, something between stone and metal, inscribed with the same symbols they'd seen throughout the cave. Emma moved closer, her hand trembling as she reached out, not quite touching the crystal case. "Dad," she whispered, "do you know what this is?" Marcus shook his head, transfixed. "This is why the Nazis were searching. This is what they wanted more than gold, more than art, more than victory." Emma's voice was barely audible. "This is knowledge, ancient knowledge, the kind that empires are built on or destroyed by." She pulled out her phone and started photographing the text on the visible pages, her hands shaking. "I need to research this. I need to find out what language this is, what it says. But Dad, we can't let anyone know we have this. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Marcus stared at the golden pages, at the script that seemed almost alive in the flashlight beam. He thought about the Nazis searching desperately for this, even as their empire crumbled. He thought about August, spending 50 years guarding it, dying alone rather than risk it falling into the wrong hands. And he thought about his own choice, made 3 years ago, to tell the truth, even when it cost him everything, to do what was right, even when the world called him crazy. "We'll figure it out," Marcus said quietly. Together, Emma looked at him, and in her eyes he saw trust, respect, and something he hadn't seen in years: pride. She was proud of him. Despite everything he'd lost, despite all his mistakes, his daughter was proud. They stood together in the ancient chamber, before a treasure worth more than money could measure, and Marcus Rivera realized something profound. He hadn't bought an unlivable shack for $800. He'd bought a second chance, a chance to be the man his daughter believed he was, a chance to protect something that mattered, a chance to prove that some things were worth more than comfort, than safety, than acceptance. Some things were worth everything. The crystal case sat on Marcus's workbench in the shack, carefully wrapped in protective foam. Emma had driven 3 hours to purchase. They'd spent 2 weeks researching the Golden Book, and what they'd discovered had kept both of them awake at night, minds racing with implications they were only beginning to understand. Emma had sent photographs of the text to 3 separate linguistics professors at different universities, each time using anonymous email accounts and claiming the images were from a private collection. The responses had been immediate and alarming. One professor called it potentially Proto-Indo-European, with elements I cannot identify. Another said it was unlike anything in the established historical record. The third simply wrote back, "Where did you find this? This could rewrite everything we know about pre-Roman Europe." But it was Emma's own research, conducted in the early morning hours while Marcus slept, that had uncovered the most disturbing connection. She'd found references in obscure Nazi documents, declassified only in 2008, about something called Das Goldene Buch der Macht, the Golden Book of Power. According to the scattered records, Hitler's inner circle had become obsessed with finding it in the late 1930s, convinced it contained ancient wisdom that would ensure their victory. They'd searched across Europe, excavating ruins in Greece, plundering monasteries in France, torturing scholars in Poland, and somewhere, somehow, they'd traced it to a research facility outside Munich, the same facility Auguste Cortés had helped liberate in 1945. They never found it, Emma said one morning, reviewing her notes. The facility was empty when the Allies arrived. Someone had evacuated everything 3 days before, but Auguste's unit captured the convoy during transport, which means she looked up at Marcus, her face pale. Auguste didn't just steal Nazi plunder. He intercepted something they'd already stolen, something they'd spent years searching for. Marcus stared at the wrapped crystal case. And now we have it. The question is, what do we do with it? That question haunted Marcus for days. The art, the gold, the question, artifacts those could be returned to their rightful owners through careful, strategic disclosure. But this book, this ancient text that had driven men to murder and empires to madness, was different. Some part of Marcus understood Auguste's choice to seal it away. Some knowledge was dangerous. Some power corrupted absolutely. But another part of him, the engineer who'd been destroyed for telling an inconvenient truth, rebelled against the idea of keeping secrets. The world deserved to know, didn't it? He was still wrestling with the question when Sarah Cortés returned. She knocked on the door one gray afternoon in early January, her expression grave. "They're coming back," she said without preamble. "The consortium. I have a contact who works in private security. He says they've been planning another inspection." Something triggered their interest again. Marcus felt his stomach drop. When? Soon. Days, maybe a week. Sarah glanced at Emma, who had emerged from the back room. "You need to secure everything. Now." They worked through the night, Marcus and Emma carefully lowering the crystal case back into the steel container and sealing the access panel they'd cut. They restored the lock mechanisms as best they could, making it look unopened. Then they descended into the cavern and spent hours rearranging crates, covering their tracks, erasing any sign of their weeks of cataloging work. By dawn, the shack looked exactly as it had when Marcus first bought it. Dilapidated, barely functional, containing nothing of value. They'd even messed up Emma's repairs, making the roof sag again, scattering debris across the floor. The tactical team arrived 4 days later, 3 black SUVs grinding up Switchback Road in the pre-dawn darkness. This time, there were more of them, 8 men in tactical gear, plus the same gray-haired man in the expensive coat. They searched for 6 hours, bringing ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment. They scanned the floor, the walls, even the foundation. Marcus and Emma sat outside in the freezing wind, watching. Marcus's heart hammered every time someone moved near the covered entrance, but the seal held. The stone beneath showed no heat signature, no anomaly. The men found nothing. Finally, the gray-haired man approached Marcus. Up close, his eyes were even colder than Marcus remembered. "Mr. Rivera, I'm going to be direct. We know something is on this property. Our instruments detected significant seismic activity originating from this exact location. That doesn't just disappear." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I've been doing construction work, reinforcing the foundation. Maybe that's what your instruments picked up." "Perhaps." The man didn't sound convinced. "But I want you to understand something. If you found anything of historical significance, anything at all, there are proper channels, museums, universities, people who can handle such things professionally. And if I don't trust those channels," Marcus asked quietly. Something flickered in the man's expression. Not anger, almost respect. "Then you'd be wise to be very, very careful. Because history has a way of crushing people who try to claim it for themselves. He turned and walked back to his vehicle. The team loaded up and drove away, leaving Marcus and Emma alone on the frozen mountain. "He knows," Emma said once the sound of engines faded. "He doesn't have proof, but he knows." Marcus nodded slowly. "Which means we can't hide this forever. Eventually, we'll have to make a choice." "What choice?" Marcus looked at his daughter, at this brilliant young woman who'd sacrificed her winter break to help him, who'd believed in him when no one else did. "The right one," he said, "whatever that turns out to be." Over the next month, Marcus and Emma developed a plan. Not a perfect plan. There was no such thing when you were dealing with $265 million in stolen artifacts, and a consortium of dangerous people who wanted them. But a plan nonetheless. First, they needed allies. Real allies. Not just Sarah's warnings from the shadows. They needed people with power, with connections, with the ability to protect them when the truth came out. Emma reached out to one of the professors who'd analyzed the Golden Book's text, a woman named Dr. Catherine Walsh at the University of Montana. Emma was careful, revealing only that her father had acquired property with potential historical significance and needed guidance on proper documentation and preservation. Dr. Walsh agreed to visit. She made the drive from Missoula on a Saturday in late January, her small sedan struggling up Switchback Road. Marcus met her outside the shack, nervous and uncertain. Dr. Walsh was in her 50s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She looked around at the shack, at the remote location, at Marcus standing there in his worn work jacket, and her expression was skeptical. "Mr. Rivera, I'm going to be honest. I receive a lot of calls from people who think they've found treasure. Usually it's worthless. Sometimes it's stolen. Very rarely is it legitimate. So, before I waste more of my time, show me what you have." Marcus led her inside. He'd prepared for this moment, selecting 3 items from the cavern that were significant but not so valuable that they'd trigger immediate seizure. A Renaissance-era painting by a minor Italian master, a Roman coin collection in remarkable condition, and a medieval manuscript, illuminated but not priceless. He laid them on the table and watched Dr. Walsh's face change. She approached slowly, pulling on white cotton gloves she'd brought. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined the painting, checking the canvas backing, studying the pigments under a magnifying loupe. Then she moved to the coins, spreading them carefully, examining stamps and wear patterns. Finally, she opened the manuscript, turning pages with reverent care. When she looked up, her face was pale. "Mr. Rivera, where did you get these?" Marcus had rehearsed this moment. "My property has a storage chamber. The previous owner, a World War II veteran named August Cortez, apparently used it to store items he'd acquired during the war. I only recently discovered it." "These aren't just items," Dr. Walsh said, her voice tight. "These are museum-quality pieces. The painting alone is worth at least $200,000. And these coins," she trailed off, examining one more closely. "This is from the reign of Nero. Genuine, uncirculated. Mr. Rivera, you're sitting on a significant historical find." "There's more," Emma said quietly. Dr. Walsh turned to her. "How much more?" "A lot more." Over the next 3 hours, Marcus and Emma told Dr. Walsh everything. They showed her August's journal, the photographs Emma had taken, the detailed catalogue they'd created. They explained about the cavern, the Nazi plunder, the tactical team, the consortium, everything except the Golden Book. That, by unspoken agreement, they kept secret. Dr. Walsh listened without interrupting, her expression moving from skepticism to shock, to something like awe. When they finished, she sat down heavily. "This is the Cortez collection," she whispered. Marcus blinked. "What?" "The Cortez collection. It's been a legend in art recovery circles for decades. After the war, there were persistent rumors about a missing transport convoy, one carrying some of the most significant pieces the Nazis had stolen. It was never found. Most people assumed the Soviets got it, or it was destroyed, or the whole thing was exaggerated. But here it is, in a cave, under a shack in Montana. She laughed, a sound somewhere between hysteria and wonder. This is going to rewrite the history of art recovery. Can you help us? Marcus asked. Dr. Walsh looked at him seriously. Mr. Rivera, what you have here is both a blessing and a curse. If we do this wrong, you'll be arrested. The collection will be seized by the government, and it'll disappear into bureaucratic limbo for decades. Museums and countries will fight over ownership. Lawyers will get rich, while families who lost these pieces wait and hope. And if we do it right, Dr. Walsh said slowly, we can return these items to their rightful owners. We can give closure to families who've waited 80 years. We can restore cultural heritage that was stolen and lost. But it will take time, patience, and absolute discretion. We have time, Emma said, and we're very patient. Dr. Walsh smiled. Then, let's make history. Over the next 6 months, Dr. Walsh became their bridge to the legitimate world. She connected them with the Holocaust Art Restitution Project, with international databases tracking stolen artwork, with lawyers specializing in cultural property recovery. She brought in a small team of trusted colleagues, a conservator, an art historian, and a security consultant. They worked in absolute secrecy, documenting everything in the cavern, researching provenance, identifying original owners. It was painstaking work, done in shifts to avoid suspicion, each piece requiring hours of careful examination and research. Marcus learned things he'd never imagined. That painting in the third crate had been stolen from a Jewish family in Amsterdam in 1942. The daughter, now 93, was still alive in Tel Aviv. That collection of medieval manuscripts had been taken from a monastery in France. The monks were gone, but the church was rebuilding and needed their history returned. Those gold bars with Nazi stamps had been melted down from seized jewelry and should be converted to a restitution fund. Every item had a story. Every story had a victim. And Marcus, the disgraced engineer who'd lost everything for telling the truth, was suddenly in a position to give something back. The transformation happened gradually. Word spread, carefully controlled by Dr. Walsh and her team. First, a small article in an academic journal about a significant discovery of World War II-era stolen art in Montana. Then a larger piece in the New York Times, carefully worded to avoid specifics, but confirming the find was genuine, and restitution efforts were underway. The response was overwhelming. Descendants of Holocaust victims reached out, clutching old photographs and hoping, praying their families' stolen treasures were among the collection. Museums contacted Dr. Walsh, requesting information about missing pieces. Governments got involved, wanting to ensure proper handling. And slowly, methodically, Dr. Walsh's team began the process of returning what had been stolen. It took negotiations, legal frameworks, careful verification of ownership claims. But one by one, the pieces of Auguste Cortez's hidden collection began going home. The first return was a painting, Woman Reading by Candlelight, by a Dutch master named Gerrit Douw. It had been stolen from a private collection in Rotterdam in 1943. The owner's grandson, a man named Jacob, flew to Montana to claim it personally. Marcus met him at the Missoula airport. This elderly man with tears streaming down his face, clutching a photograph of his grandfather, standing next to the very painting they were about to return to him. "My grandfather died in Auschwitz," Jacob said, his English thick with Dutch accent. "But before the Nazis came, he made my father memorize every painting in our home, every detail. So someday, if they were ever found, we could prove they were ours. I grew up with those descriptions. Woman, reading by candlelight. She has a blue dress, red book, single candle flame reflected in her eyes. I've dreamed of her my whole life. They brought him to the shack, now converted into a makeshift headquarters for the restitution project. The painting, cleaned and conserved, hung in a temperature-controlled case. When Jacob saw it, he collapsed, just fell to his knees, sobbing, reaching out with shaking hands to touch the frame. "She's real," he whispered. "She's real. Thank you. Thank you." Marcus helped him up, this stranger who felt like family. And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten. Purpose. There were more returns. Many more. A Torah scroll to a synagogue in Prague. Ancient Greek pottery to a museum in Athens. Chinese artifacts to Taiwan. Each return came with tears, with gratitude, with the kind of healing that only truth and justice can bring. And with each return, Marcus's reputation transformed. He wasn't the crazy whistleblower anymore. He wasn't the disgraced engineer. He was the man who'd found the Cortez collection and chosen to return it rather than keep it. The mining industry noticed. 6 months into the restitution project, Marcus received a phone call from an unexpected source, Cascade Minerals, the company that had fired and blacklisted him. "Mr. Rivera, this is Thomas Chen, CEO of Cascade Minerals. I'm calling to offer you a formal apology." Marcus, sitting at his workbench in the shack, almost dropped the phone. "Excuse me? The Greystone mine expansion you reported on. We've had structural failures. Exactly as you predicted. We had to evacuate 200 workers last week. You were right, and we destroyed your career for it. I'm calling to offer you your position back, with back pay, and a full public acknowledgement that we were wrong." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for the apology, but I don't want the job back." Silence on the other end. "Mr. Rivera, I spent 15 years working for people who cared more about profit than safety. I'm done with that. I've found something better." He hung up and looked around the shack. It had changed dramatically over the past months. The roof was properly repaired now, the walls insulated, the floor, except for the sealed entrance, restored. Emma had brought up a real bed, a proper stove, even a small generator for power. It wasn't luxurious, but it was home, and more than that, it had become something else. A headquarters, a sanctuary, a place where stolen history was being made whole again. The town of Frost Ridge had transformed, too. The international attention on the Cortez collection brought reporters, academics, and tourists. The Antler Creek Diner was suddenly busy every night. Dale's hardware store started stocking supplies for the increased traffic. A small hotel opened on Main Street, the first new business in 20 years. And Marcus, once mocked and shunned, was now treated with respect, bordering on reverence. He'd become the guardian of Frost Ridge's unexpected claim to fame, the man who'd found a treasure and chosen honor over wealth. But Marcus knew the truth. He hadn't been noble. He'd been terrified, paralyzed by indecision, nearly destroyed by the burden of August's secret. It was Emma who'd saved him. Emma and Dr. Walsh and Sarah and all the people who'd believed when believing was difficult. One evening in late summer, as the Montana sun painted the mountains gold, Marcus stood outside the shack with Emma. She was heading back to college in 2 days, her gap year complete, her life ready to resume. But she'd changed, too. The uncertain teenager who'd arrived 9 months ago was now confident, purposeful, already planning a career in cultural heritage preservation. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" Marcus's throat tightened. "I should be thanking you. You saved me. In every way, a person can be saved." Emma shook her head. "You saved yourself. You just needed someone to remind you who you were." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the peaks. Then Emma said, "What about the book? The golden one?" Marcus had been expecting this question. They hadn't touched the steel container in months, hadn't discussed what to do with the ancient text August had sealed away. But the question hung between them, unanswered. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Dr. Walsh says some artifacts are too sensitive for public display. Some knowledge is too dangerous to release without understanding the consequences." "Do you believe that?" Marcus thought about everything he'd learned over the past year, about the Nazis searching desperately for the Golden Book, about August spending 50 years guarding it, about power and corruption and the terrible things people did in the name of knowledge. "I believe," he said slowly, "that some choices are bigger than one person. The art, the gold, the artifacts, those belong to specific people and cultures. They could be returned. But that book? It's different. It's ancient. It's powerful. And until we understand what it really is, what it really says, we can't risk unleashing it on an unprepared world." Emma nodded slowly. "So it stays sealed. For now, maybe forever. Or maybe someday, someone smarter than us will figure out what to do with it." Marcus smiled faintly. "August made his choice. I'm making mine. And whoever owns this property after me will make theirs. That's how it should be. Some burdens are meant to be passed down, generation to generation, until the world is finally ready." The next morning, Emma packed her car for the drive back to Oregon. Marcus helped her load boxes, both of them working in the easy rhythm they'd developed over the months. When everything was loaded, they stood together one last time outside the shack. "Will you be okay here, alone?" Emma asked. Marcus looked up at the structure that had once been called Unlivable, that had sheltered August's secret for 70 years, that had become his home and his purpose. "I won't be alone. Dr. Walsh's team visits twice a month. Sarah checks in weekly. The whole town knows I'm here now. I'm more connected than I've been in." Emma hugged him, fierce and tight. "I love you, Dad. I'll be back for Thanksgiving." "I love you too, sweetheart. Drive safe." He watched her car navigate the switchbacks, disappearing down the mountain, and felt not sadness but gratitude. His daughter knew him again, respected him, loved him. Everything else was just details. That afternoon, Marcus descended into the cavern, one last time before the next team visit. Most of the crates were gone now, returned to their rightful owners or in transit to museums and restitution centers. The space felt empty, echoing, but not sad. It felt clean, like a wound finally healed. Only the steel container remained, standing alone in the center of the chamber. Marcus approached it, placing his hand on the cold metal. Whatever secrets it held, whatever power it contained, would stay hidden a while longer. "I hope I made the right choice," he whispered to August's ghost, to the mountain, to himself. "I hope you'd understand." The mountain didn't answer, but in the silence, Marcus felt something like peace. 6 months later, on a bright April morning, the Cortez Heritage Center officially opened. It wasn't in the shack that remained Marcus's private residence and the sealed entrance to the cavern below. Instead, the town of Frost Ridge had converted an old lumber mill into a proper museum, funded by a portion of the liquidated gold from the collection, with full permission from international restitution authorities. The center told the story of Auguste Cortez, his service in World War II, his liberation of the Nazi storage facility, his impossible choice to hide rather than relinquish the treasures, his 50 years of solitary guardianship. It displayed photographs of the items that had been recovered and returned, along with thank you letters from grateful families and institutions worldwide. But more than that, it told the story of choices, of truth versus convenience, of courage versus comfort, of one man standing against corruption and another man completing that stand 70 years later. Marcus stood in the center on opening day, surrounded by hundreds of people. Locals from Frost Ridge, academics from around the world, descendants of families who'd received stolen property back, even representatives from Cascade Minerals, there to publicly apologize and announce new safety standards Marcus had helped develop. Dr. Walsh took the podium, her voice carrying across the crowd. Today we celebrate not just the return of stolen art, but the power of integrity. Auguste Cortez chose sacrifice over profit. Marcus Rivera chose truth over acceptance. Together, across generations, they proved that some things matter more than money, more than reputation, more than safety. They proved that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, is never a mistake. The crowd applauded. Marcus, uncomfortable with attention, tried to slip away to the back. But Jacob, the Dutch man whose painting had been the first returned, caught his arm. "Mr. Rivera, wait." Jacob's eyes were wet. "I brought something for you." He handed Marcus a photograph, old and faded. It showed a young man, Jacob's grandfather, standing in a beautiful home, surrounded by paintings. Woman reading by candlelight hung prominently on the wall behind him. "My grandfather," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "Taken in 1939, before the Nazis came, before everything was stolen, before he died. I wanted you to see him, to know that because of you, his memory is restored. Not just the painting, but his legacy, his dignity, his life. You gave that back to us." Marcus stared at the photograph, at this man, frozen in time, smiling in his home, surrounded by beauty that would soon be ripped away. And he understood, finally, what Auguste had been protecting. Not just art, not just gold, but this, memory, dignity, the proof that these people had existed, had mattered, had built beautiful lives before evil destroyed them. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for trusting me with his story." Jacob embraced him, and standing there in the museum, surrounded by the results of a year of impossible choices and hard work, Marcus Rivera felt something he hadn't felt since before he'd blown the whistle on Cascade Minerals. He felt whole. The months that followed brought continued transformation. The Cortez Heritage Center became a destination, drawing visitors from across the globe. Frost Ridge, once dying, now thrived. New businesses opened. Young people stayed instead of leaving. The town had purpose again, identity beyond being a forgotten dot on a map. Marcus became the center's unofficial historian, giving tours, telling Auguste's story, explaining the painstaking process of restitution. He was invited to speak at universities, at conferences, at Holocaust remembrance events. He always went, always spoke with quiet authority about choices and consequences, and the long shadow cast by stolen history. But he always returned to the mountain, to the shack, to the sealed entrance beneath its floor, because some secrets were his to keep, some burdens were his to carry. And he'd accepted that with clear eyes and an understanding heart. One evening, 2 years after that first day, when he'd placed his hand on the carved stone and heard the ancient locks disengage, Marcus sat on the porch of his shack, watching the sun paint the Bitterroot Range in shades of fire and gold. His phone rang. "Emma. Dad. I got into the graduate program at Columbia. Art conservation. Full scholarship." Marcus smiled, pride flooding his chest. "That's incredible, sweetheart. I'm so proud. I wouldn't be here without you, without what we did together. I found my calling in that cave." "You found yourself," Marcus corrected gently. "The cave was just the place where it happened." After they hung up, Marcus remained on the porch, thinking about callings and choices and the strange paths life takes. 3 years ago, he'd lost everything. His job, his reputation, his family, his home. He'd been broken, desperate, buying an unlivable shack for $800 because he had nowhere else to go. And in that shack, in that impossible place everyone had called worthless, He'd found the thing that saved him. Not the treasure, though. $265 million had certainly helped with restitution efforts. Not the fame, though. His vindication had been sweet. But something more fundamental: purpose. He'd found proof that telling the truth, even when it destroyed you, was never the wrong choice. That standing for what was right, even alone, even mocked, even blacklisted, mattered. August had stood alone for 50 years. Marcus had stood alone for 3. And now, neither of them was alone anymore. They were connected across time, across death, by the simple, radical choice to do what was right, regardless of cost. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Marcus thought about the golden book, still sealed in its container, still guarded by stone and ice. Maybe it would stay sealed forever. Maybe his grandchildren's grandchildren would face the same choice he'd faced. Or maybe someday, the world would be ready for whatever wisdom or power it contained. But that wasn't his burden anymore. He'd made his choice. He'd returned what could be returned, protected what should be protected, and built something lasting from the ashes of August's solitary vigil. He'd done enough. He'd done well. And for the first time in years, Marcus Rivera slept deeply, dreamlessly, at peace. Anyone can lose everything and still find redemption if they're brave enough to keep standing when the whole world says to fall. As autumn leaves turned gold across the Montana wilderness, Marcus Rivera stood not in a condemned shack, but in a home he'd earned. Not as a disgraced engineer, but as a guardian of truth. Not as a man who'd lost his daughter, but as a father who'd shown her that integrity matters more than acceptance. The mountain that everyone said would kill him had instead given him life. The shack they called Unlivable had become the foundation of legacy. And the vault worth $265 million had proved something worth far more. That one person, alone and forgotten, can still change the world if they refuse to compromise on what matters. Because for Marcus, and for everyone who will hear his story, the greatest treasure was never buried in ice. It was buried in choice, the choice to stand, the choice to speak, the choice to believe that truth is worth protecting, even when you're the only one left who cares. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that redemption is always possible when courage meets conviction.